Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, it is a great pleasure to step into a topic that I think is crucial as we return into something of the realm of normalcy, but I don't think it's normal. Let's just call it a new normal. And that is, for many of us, we've really not had the opportunity to exercise or be a participant in hospitable worlds, in the COVID isolation. The hospitality has been joining somebody else on a Zoom call, but our worlds are opening at least a little bit. And in that context, we've got the opportunity to participate a little bit more in the flesh, in the experience of being hospitable. And to begin this conversation with my very best friend, Dr. Tremper Longman III. It's just always so fun to be with you, Tremper, and particularly when I get to partake of your remarkable expertise. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Dan. And as you know, it's always great to be with you too, except as you just reminded me earlier today, that whenever we get together in a hospitable fashion, you trounce me in ping pong. I'm not sure that's...
Well, and we've just finished scheduling a course that we will offer at the Seattle School for March of 2022. And I've asked, I think you noted in my email that we would pay for you to meet with Lucy, the faux psychiatrist who charges 5 cents per session, to then deal with both your grief and shame for losing so often to me.
That's true. I suggested that money be spent on lessons. And then I guess you haven't seen it. But
no, I didn't see that.
Well, she responded by sending a link to some and it was a sort of Alzheimer ping pong therapy session in Seattle somewhere, I believe. And I said that might be better for Dan because he's much older than I.
I am much older.
For 3 weeks.
Yeah. But I mean, those 3 weeks were pretty germinal and creating, whatever. Anyway, as we deal with this topic of hospitality, I just want to start by saying your wife, Alice, and I believe my wife, Becky, are two of the most hospitable human beings I've known on the earth. And I would say of the two of us, I wouldn't say that we're obdurate or that we are recalcitrant to be hospitable. I'll just say that we're not as hospitable as our wives. I've learned so much from your wife. I've learned so much from Becky. But before we begin, I want you to just put a few words to what you've learned about hospitality through your wife.
Well, I've learned that, hospitable to actually be sensitive to inviting people into our lives and into our home. And you're exactly right. I would describe Alice is very proactive in hospitality, and I am in certain contexts. I don't know whether we'll talk about this either. I think one thing some people like me struggle with is accepting hospitality. Alice is also much better at that than I am, but that's part of the question as well, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Too often I do think we speak about hospitality as something you offer, but I think it is much harder. Some of the most important life-changing experiences of hospitality have been where I've been invited in, and in settings where the gift that I've been given through the other is not commensurate to what I'm able to return. And that sense of the inequality of hospitality can create that dissonance that when you receive what you cannot give, can you just receive? And it really will eventually come back to the notion that grace is the beginning point for any understanding of what it means to offer others a place of safety and provision, to be able to grow and to become who they're meant to be. But one of the reasons that I have invited a PhD Yale graduate in Semitic studies to this particular podcast, other than I just love being with you, is to begin to open up the reality that hospitality fundamentally is not entertaining. It is not primarily you're entertaining friends, you're entertaining family. That, of course, is a form of hospitality that I don't want to minimize, but hospitality has a setting for those of us who are followers of Jesus, and that is we've got a Hebrew Bible to instruct us. So the first thing I want you to kind of talk with us about is, what was hospitality like in the ancient Near East, and why was it the way that it was?
Yeah, I think talking in general terms, because, to be honest, I imagine when we talk about the time period of the Old Testament, we're talking about creation down to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, which is, if you like me, not a young earth creationist, we're talking about billions of years, but humans have only been on the world for a small fraction of that. But bottom line is, in the ancient world, there weren't, say, hotels or many inns. There were inns, but not a lot. And there weren't restaurants, and there weren't things. And if you traveled, you were kind of dependent on others, even strangers, to care for you. And there are lots and lots of biblical accounts of people coming into a city. Some of them go well, some of them go poorly. But it's not only providing provision, but also protection. It's also, another aspect of this is hospitality engenders deeper relationship. Even if you start from zero, as you extend hospitality, you are inviting somebody into deeper relationship. And if you know somebody well, even when you extend your hospitality to me, when we're teaching together, and after 50 plus years, our relationship deepens as I stay there, and you need to be a little bit more intentional about intentional about visiting us and on the East Coast now. But we did have COVID to deal with.
Yeah, and also, we won't go into much detail, but the burning down of your home, it creates a little bit of a complication for being able, you're not in your own home truly to be able to offer the hospitality that you would wish. But we can do another podcast on your calamity. But as you think about the whole notion of a code of hospitality, there was a way of being where to not accept a stranger would have been a form of deep dishonor. Literally, it was a dangerous world, and there were not places to stay. And so a stranger in a largely migrant Bedouin type world, if you don't have a place to stay, you are susceptible not only to death, but to forms of violence. And in that, it's a very different culture, obviously. I mean, it seems so obvious, but to underscore, when you would invite a stranger into your house, was there a process? Did all strangers just knock on the door and people like, oh, come on in? How was it conducted as best as we know?
Yeah, as best as we know is an important concept here because we get, is not interested in giving, our ancient sources aren't saying, here's the code of hospitality. What we are getting are glimpses into hospitality in narrative texts, say, well, there are lots of them, say, Abraham and the three visitors in Genesis 18 and following, or Lot when those three visitors come into Sodom. And some of these, by the way, go well, and some don't go so well. But you're exactly right that if a stranger comes into town, that hospitality is expected to be extended. But on the other hand, that's not to say that there wasn't some screening, there wasn't some, and we get stories when screening didn't happen and bad things happened. So I'm thinking of, it's in Jeremiah 40 to 45, when after the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Babylonians set up a Jewish governor named Gedaliah, who's an ally of Jeremiah. But there's a descendant of David who's kind of out of control, who's living in a cave, but then in false pretenses comes down to try to broker with the pretense of brokering peace, and Gedaliah accepts him, and then he violates that hospitality by murdering and assassinating Gedaliah. And so on the other hand, I think what we learned from this is we want to be welcoming, but not naive.
Indeed. And we'll get to some degree of trying to make it transition into our culture. But just to, again, come back, that the notion of the code of honor was, even if I take in somebody who might have a kind of conflict with a larger world, I'm called to protect that person. I'm called to make sure that they have provision, meaning, in some sense, the best of what I have to offer, but also a commitment to make sure no harm comes to you while you're under my roof. Is that, and again, there are just sections of scripture that are difficult to read as one offers literally the prospect of doing harm to his own daughters in order to avoid the guest being assaulted. A very difficult, complex passage. But that notion of when you're under my roof, there's a certain stance I take toward you.
Yeah, but I would argue, and you're referring, of course, to when the men of Sodom come in and try to get the visitors, and from Lot, or I think it's Judges 19, is a very similar story where, the person who extended hospitality to this unnamed person, and they throw out his concubine rather than having them violate the guest, are perversions of that code. I don't think we're to think of that as this is ancient Near Eastern hospitality, or at least a violation of local expectations of that code.
Yes, but it does absolutely important to be understood. It is not what God has called for. It is wrong. It is abuse. It is perverted. It is atrocious. However, it is a perversion of something that is essential to underscore, and that is, under my roof, you've got protection. And not the protection that is indeed in those settings offered, but nonetheless, that sense that you will know safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You want to go this direction, but this has implications for the whole question of immigration, not just our own personal hospitality, but as Christians, how do we respond to people in trouble who are seeking refuge in our country? Do we try to resist them, or do we welcome them? Yeah, all those kind of questions are I think connected to the question of hospitality, because there's an awful lot of the Old Testament law that is pressing on the Israelites to be welcoming to the ger, the immigrant. And so it comes into their midst. And I personally have been distraught with a lot of Christian attitude toward the immigration issue. Not to say that there shouldn't be screening. There's got to be screening, but...
I want to go there. But before we go there, I want to see if we can come to, again, a way of capturing what we learn, particularly through the Hebrew Scriptures. What's the basis of hospitality? And let me name it from my perspective, and then let you run. And that is, you were once strangers. You were once, and I have offered you hospitality. You are now my people. You were once a stranger, but now you are not. And that seems to be something of the very core. You were once immigrants. You were once not part. Now you are. And how you then respond has to be out of a deep reservoir of both awareness, but also gratitude. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Very fair. I mean, Abraham is highlighted as a ger, or a foreigner within the promised land. The whole story of Israel in the story of violation of being a foreigner in a foreign land. And later Israel is reminded that you don't want to treat the foreigners in your midst like you were treated in Egypt.
Yes.
So
you have both the contrast, how I have offered you place and space to be well protected and well provided for, but also remember what you experienced within the inhospitality of 400 years of slavery. So those are the points of contrast. And I think what you're bringing, I want you to put as many words to it as you would wish, but we think of hospitality too often as inviting people to our home, which should be one of the central portions of what hospitality holds. But it is not limited to inviting people to your home for dinner. It's how you interact with your neighbors over the proverbial fence. It's how you engage somebody you've not met or somebody you know well in a coffee shop. There's a kind of notion of hospitality which becomes not an activity as much as a stance of how we engage others, including both individual, familial, church, systemic, but also cultural and national. So take us. I know you've written on this, at least in one of your volumes, which are magnificent and a plethora. So, yeah, immigration and hospitality.
Yeah, I think. Well, I guess. So I did write this book, The Bible and the Ballot, just to get the name out there, and which is looking at biblical principles, but also how the Bible's trying to shape our attitudes and our rhetoric on important public policy issues. And what was disturbing me and continues to disturb me is both the attitude and the rhetoric of some of my Christians immigration, even though I think the principles that the Bible gives us, both in terms of hospitality in general and also in terms of other factors, is that I don't think that, to put it bluntly, I don't think the Bible leads us to a concept of, but I think it does lead us to of being as welcoming as we can to the foreigner, to the stranger, and certainly not in terms of rhetoric to demonize those who come and seek protection or a better life for their families, their children, etc. So yeah, I think it is very much connected to the topic hospitality. And as you said earlier, and I wanted to reaffirm the fact that that God himself is depicted throughout Scripture, the ultimate host, the ultimate host in terms of just creating us in our world and inviting us into it and having a relationship with us, which we violated, pursuing us. And just to take one striking, the well-known Psalm 23, you have prepared a table for me in the presence of my enemies. God is often depicted as the host who provides us, who sustains us, who protects us, and more.
Well, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that passage has, at least by some interpreters, that particular section you've created, in some sense, a banquet before those who want to do me harm, as a category of, even if you have committed the possibility of crimes, and you are, in one sense, in danger for those who are seeking revenge, you are safe within my home. Is that a misinterpretation?
I don't know. I would need to see within the text itself those indications. I mean, I've always read it as the idea of, no, evil people are out there trying to do me in. Mm-hmm. And but I may have missed something. I'm always open to, but I don't. Yeah. So.
Well, bluntly said, you need to read a volume you edited. I always forget the title. I think it's one of the. Yes, it's one of the finest volumes. It's one of those volumes that I think should be in everyone's library, because in the section on hospitality, there is a section, whoever wrote that, who implied that even if there had been, the claims that you have done harm to my people, to my tribe, if under my roof you still have a safety, I will not let those who have claims against you take you and have access to do you harm. Now, he also underscores it's not an unlimited period of time, that oftentimes, at least, there's some basis to say you've got basically about 2 days of protection and provision. There wasn't the notion that you're going to move in and you're going to stay forever. And I can't get rid of you because of this code of honor. So there's a realism to our notions of hospitality, but also, again, back to the primary category, generosity and provision, and a ferocity and protection. And in that question of, well, why, not that this is the primary reason, but also another motive for hospitality is you don't know who you're actually entertaining. You've got the Hebrews 13:2 passage that some of you have actually invited in what seems to imply by the text, angels. So you've got something of a larger ancient world perspective that sometimes Zeus and others sort of show up in the form of a human being, and you don't know when you're entertaining. So that's part of a Greek and other cultural worlds. Seems to actually also be part, at least in the Hebrews context, of who you're inviting. You don't really know.
Yeah. Well, and I'm an Old Testament professor, not a New Testament one, but I read the New Testament once in a while. There's a passage too about where Jesus is upset because, you haven't taken care of me by not having taken care of those who are in need.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Let me just bluntly say that's hilarious. You don't know where it is. It's Matthew 25.
Yes, thank you. But I knew it was in some gospel somewhere. But
yeah, it really is.
Even if Psalm 23 doesn't actually teach what you were saying earlier, I think that's a true biblical principle that, and again, I go back to the question of immigration and the idea of, say, sanctuary cities, or our church has a legal service to people who are undocumented, and it gives them the space to make their case before. So they came here with no documents, but that doesn't mean that they weren't fleeing some horrible situation or something. Mm-hmm. And so I think in that case, our church is extending the proper type of hospitality. It's not like, what you have done in the past or who you are or why you want to be here. But it's also not well, you came here illegally, therefore you just have to go back.
Yeah. There's I love the way you put it earlier. We don't have to be naive. There is assessment. But in that, the primary motive is not protection of ourselves. The commitment is to make sure that there is provision and protection. And now how we offer that, we'll be offering people the very best of what we have to offer, given what we've received. So much like forgiveness, it's derivative. We forgive as we've been forgiven. In the same way, hospitality is We offer as it has been offered. And that gift is so mutual because, wow, because the stranger brings to us a world, a viewpoint, an experience, literally their suffering and their beauty in a way that we need in order to grow to become who we're meant to be. So it is not just a kind of patronizing, I give you what you don't have. It is, we are receiving in your presence a world, a new way of looking, thinking, speaking, and engaging that we need to continue to be able to grow. So as we come to an end, I'll come back to that central question of, so how has this process formed in you, even just one or two ways that you have seen your world offering and receiving hospitality?
Well, and again, you're right. It's in one sense been so long since we've been able to extend or receive some forms of hospitality. But I go back to the fact that both extending it and receiving it has deepened many important relationships for me. I just got together even for lunch. Local pastor invited a friend whom you know, Pete Wayner, and I out to lunch. We sat down for like 3 hours and enjoyed a meal together. And I was shaped by, not just intellectually, but also emotionally and spiritually by that experience. Yeah. It's not to say, too, that extending hospitality doesn't involve some measure of sacrifice, but that's also who we should be as Christians, right?
Yeah. Well, and as we end, let's just, I want to see if we can get a statement of affirmation on your part. When you are able to move back into your old home, which will become something of a new home once all the effects of the fire are alleviated, you have a guest room that you have designated. And will there be a plaque that will be outside of that guest room?
Yes, there will be a plaque. It will be a plaque, and it will say, for Dan and Becky. And then after you leave, we'll take the Allender guest room. The
Allender guest room that other people are more than welcome to join.
Thank you.
But they will be coming into the Allender guest room.
yes. And we look forward to that.
Yes, you know that there is a high prospect, especially as I move toward whatever version of retirement I create, that we will be spending way more than 2 days in your domicile. It could be months upon months upon months. Good to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, great to be with you too, Dan.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.